Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a full review of the Nothing Phony Duza Plus. Let's get started. Nodding's strategy is a bit strange because supposedly the devices with the letter A in their name are going to be mid-range devices, a little bit tighter, but we don't really see them priced that low. Or in other cases, they start competing also with their CMF branded devices. So the strategy is still not so clear to me, but it is not a bad device. Its launch price in Mexico has been 9,499 pesos. On the screen, you see the reference price in dollars, although remember that the prices here are not the same as there, but more or less it can help you get an idea, which at least in Mexico places it in the medium-high range. It has very good competitors. It also has disastrous competitors that it can easily beat. But it is a price range where there are several devices, so what do you think if you join me to know it in depth? The first thing you should know is that its distribution in Mexico is 100% online through Nodding stores or also in Mercado Libre. So in the description I leave you purchase links in case you are interested, because it will not be easy to acquire it in a physical store. That would be its first weak point. Let's start talking about the design, because note that Nothing almost always bets on having symmetrical bezels. And in this case, they seem to have succeeded. It is clear that they are not ultra-reduced bezels, but it's pretty good. Note that even the bottom bezel is not too thick. This front comes protected with Gorilla Glass V, which is acceptable, although in this price range there are already other devices that begin to incorporate Gorilla Glass Victus. On the right side, we find the power button and all this in a plastic frame with a matte look. At the top, there will only be a microphone, while on the left side are placed the volume buttons. At the bottom, we will find the perforations for the main speaker, also the USB port, then a microphone, and finally a tray where we can place 2 nano SIM cards. But ultimately, the most attractive thing about this device in terms of design will be the look of the back cover. It is a device that looks very technological. I think there is a very specific group of people that this design will appeal too much to. It not only incorporates transparencies that allow the visualization of some screws or some other parts inside the device, but it also incorporates these lights, called as glyph lights, through which we are going to be able to have some additional software functions that I will show you later. For now, I'm just controlling its brightness, which is 3 different levels. But in this case, don't think that it's just 3 lights, but each of these strips is made up of different LEDs, so they can light up in different ways that I'll show you later. But there's no doubt that that's the most attractive thing about this device in terms of design, although the back cover is made of plastic, so you can easily get fingerprints on it. However, in this edition that is gray, they are not so easily noticed, as if they could be noticed in the black edition that is also available. By the way, as last data, this device has a weight of 190 grams. It is comfortable to hold in the hand and has a thickness of 8.5 millimeters. The screen is really good. Its size is 6.7 inches and offers a resolution of 2412 by 1084 pixels, which is slightly larger than Full HD+, but simply because of the proportion or the rounded corners. In general, we could consider it as a Full HD+ screen. It offers us AMOLED technology with very vivid colors, as you realize. It also offers very high contrasts and also good viewing angles, so that you still have a good display of the content even when the device is turned to another direction. This is a display that supports HDR XP plus content, so some content you might notice is brighter in specific areas of the screen. In fact, in this way the screen could peak at 1300 nits, which is not too much, but when watching HDR content it is very much appreciated. This screen has 394 pixels per inch in its density, so that even small texts appear sharp. It also gives us 120 Hz in its refresh rate, so all movements and transitions will look very smooth and fluid. And with respect to brightness, definitely that it is a very bright screen for comfortable outdoor use, and the minimum brightness is also low enough for comfortable indoor use. In fact, within the accessibility options, it also includes the extra dimming option, so you could lower the brightness even further. And as I told you, the screen itself lowers its brightness very well, so if you turn on the extra dimming option, you could end up with a very comfortable screen at night. It's definitely a screen that competes very well against any of its competitors. We will find two speakers, so it does give us stereo sound. And it is a sound that is of good quality, although expected in the range. Nothing surprising, it has a slight presence of bass frequencies, but it is not something that I have considered very spectacular. What do you think if we listen to a small test? But remember, it's not the same to listen to it live. In terms of volume, I think it also gave us a positive experience. Where the experience won't be as positive will be in the software. Notice that it doesn't have any access to an equalizer, it doesn't have Dolby Atmos, there's just an enhanced audio switch that's supposedly going to give us better audio on external devices, but you're not really going to notice much of a difference. So the sound experience is not that well complemented in software. As you have already seen, it does not have a headphone jack, but fortunately it does support high-resolution audio codecs such as aptX, LDAC, and LHDC. So it has everything so that if you buy a high-resolution headphones, you have the complete assurance that they will be compatible with this cell phone. In addition to the side microphones that I had already shown you in the design stage, there is another microphone that is a bit hidden. Specifically, it is located in a small perforation in the back cover, so you have 3 microphones in total. Possibly this microphone back here is much more focused on noise cancellation. Although in fact, note that from its voice recorder app itself, it has different modes. One of normal recording, another that will give much more focus to the voice, trying to eliminate external noises, and finally an environment mode that will try to record in all directions depending on what you prefer. Let's do a test with the normal mode.
Esta es una grabación de audio realizada con los micrófonos del Nothing Phone 2A Plus.
Definitely, the voice recording quality is very good, and I like the fact that you can select whether or not you want to have noise cancellation inside the recorder. But now let's test these microphones in a much noisier environment, recording a video, to try to simulate what would happen at a concert.
Why can't you take a hint and just play loud? I know I look so fine, but baby I won't lie. I want you by my side, 'cause I can see the way you lie and how you try to get my attention. Don't you love?
I think that even though it does try to adjust its gain to regulate louder sounds, we will notice a slight loss in audio quality when the sound is very loud. A certain level of distortion is perceived. I suppose that in environments with even louder noise, the distortion will be more noticeable. So in that aspect, I didn't like it so much, but they could perfectly correct it with an update to better control its gain while recording video. And regarding the vibration, note that it does have a selector to modify the intensity of the vibration motor, which is on the x-axis. So it does produce a high-quality vibration. It is perceived as premium. In that aspect, I think it can indeed outperform several of its competitors, which can offer you motors on the z-axis, which are much simpler. However, there are still some elements that do not produce some vibration response. For example, the brightness slider or the control center switches. So in general, you're not going to perceive this premium vibration so constantly. On these switches, for example, you do get to perceive this response in your hand. But that's another point that over time nothing could improve with an upgrade. The front camera has a resolution of 50 megapixels. Its lens has f-aperture 2.2 and fixed focus. In this case, we can double press the power button to be able to access the camera, even with the device locked. Or also, while you are in any other application, you can apply this same gesture and the camera aperture will be remarkably good. This camera is going to offer us 2 different levels of width at 24 and 29 millimeters, so it's not as wide as others. Notice that while we're taking several pictures, you're going to notice that it's not as snappy, especially in this scenario where it's applying HDR. If you turn HDR off, you're going to have a faster response, but the lighting quality is not going to be as good. Of course, you can set automatic HDR, and also note that there are some color filters that you can apply, but not just color, but it can also be this one, which gives you a pretty interesting effect, especially for creating wallpapers or something like that. In the bottom left corner, we have the button to access the retouching mode, which can only be natural retouching or intense retouching. It does not have different types of parameters to modify the face, nor does it have an easy palm gesture for those moments where it is difficult to reach the shutter. In fact, it doesn't have a floating shutter either. So what you can do is press one of the volume buttons, but it's a slightly awkward action. The setup is simple, but here you could enable the option to tap anywhere on the screen to take the picture, which could also help. In the case of the front camera, there is no burst available. What I like most about the selfies on this device is the color management they do. It's very similar to the iPhone color, so the color perspective is slightly warmer, but it gives it a pretty appealing touch. It also has a good level of detail at medium arm's length, although it has fixed focus. If you have your arm a little more stretched out, note that it still holds good detail but doesn't have as accurate focus due to it not being autofocus. Still, I think it would give good results. However, if you are very close or want to capture some detail of your face, you won't be able to do it. In this case, it's a camera that doesn't have that much width, so for group selfie photography, many people will have to be a bit further away to be able to be framed well, although fortunately I think it keeps a good focus on all faces, giving a good result in this kind of scenarios. It's just not very wide. In backlit scenes, it is surprising that it does have a good balance in the preview, something that few Android devices can boast, and in this price range is spectacular. Of course, after taking the picture, it does an even more advanced balance of highlights and shadows, and I insist that the picture quality looks very good, especially because of this characteristic color. In indoor scenes with much less lighting, it still retains a good level of detail, although it is not completely free of a bit of graininess, but in exchange for that, it gives us good detail, and in this case also a sufficiently high saturation of colors. At night, note the advanced result it is able to offer us. Again, it enhances the level of detail well, although there is perhaps a slightly artificial sharpness, but nothing unusual. Even the clothing, note how it still maintains a certain level of texture. It's a very clean picture, no excessive noise is visible in any area, so I really got a very good experience from this front-facing camera. Notice how even in nighttime backlit scenarios, it gives us a good performance. The truth has surprised me a lot in this aspect, although it used the screen to better illuminate the face, but note that it manages to expose well enough the brightest areas without completely sacrificing the shadow area. In truth, at this price, it is possibly one of the best we will find in front camera. Without using the additional lighting of the screen, we will find a still positive result, very natural, because it retains this dark effect that was in the photograph, so I like the result. I also tried to do a test in a much darker environment, and this is what the preview looked like. Notice that the result is curious because let's say that it keeps the picture very natural because it really looked that dark. Also in this case, virtually no noise or very good noise control, but it's not such a spectacular photo in terms of how much light input it has. You can use the screen to light your face a little better, but it's very cool lighting. And I was in a warm environment, so the result is not that advanced in this kind of scenario. Portrait photography with the front camera at night, note that it still maintains good detail in the face and it does apply a good enough bokeh effect. But in the daytime we notice that it is not able to keep objects in focus, so the results might come out a bit strange if you have any objects nearby. Portrait photos with this front camera will come out better without any additional objects, as the face detection does do it correctly. On the back, we'll find two cameras. First, the 14mm ultra-wide camera, so it has good width with a 50-megapixel sensor, something very interesting. The aperture is f2.2 and it has fixed focus. On the other hand, there is the 24mm main camera with a traditional focal length 50-megapixel sensor. The lens has f1.88 aperture, and in this case, the positive thing is that we find optical stabilization, plus it obviously has autofocus. Note that in this case, it is also going to have a sufficiently agile response to continuous photography. We're also going to find present an available burst of up to 20 photographs, and note that in this test where we tried to capture number 3, we noticed that it apparently has some sort of buffer that corrects the photographs about 10 milliseconds earlier. So we never managed to capture number 3 because generally the result always anticipated the shutter pressure. It's a behavior not so usual in smartphones. So let's say you don't have to worry about pressing exactly the right moment to take the picture because the device will give you a little bit of anticipation. The burst fortunately takes a short time to start, although it is a bit short burst with 20 photos, but the space between one photo and another is relatively short, so it might help you to extract the exact photograph of some moment, but it is only a second. In this case, notice that we are going to find 2 color rendering modes. By default, you have the nature mode, which through the engine that nothing uses called True Lens, will highlight precisely the natural textures, or there is also a vivid representation that will give you more intense colors through artificial intelligence. For our test, we use the nature mode, which is set by default. One thing I don't like about this camera is that it doesn't allow you to quickly switch between modes. As you can see, it's just going to switch one by one, instead of switching quickly with a more nimble swipe. You can tell they took a lot of inspiration from the iPhone interface, which is just as hopeless, so you have to go slowly to be able to switch modes, and the truth is that it's a pretty simple camera in terms of its interface. It also allows you to have HDR disabled and load the list of color filters or special effects, just like what we saw on the front camera. The timer is hidden in the additional settings, as well as motion capture photography and image ratio change. Also, here is the high-resolution mode and guidelines. If you touch the screen, you can adjust the focus or exposure compensation, but if you want more parameters, you can go to the expert mode, where you can regulate the exposure compensation, also the ISO, which you can raise up to 6400, the shutter speed, which can go up to 32 seconds, white balance, autofocus, and whether it supports RAW photography. In fact, you could also use the ultra-wide camera, which supports the same parameters. Except for the focus, of course, because it has fixed focus. Fortunately, it does have the option to scan QR codes directly from the main interface, and note that it does so very quickly, although the button is a bit far to press, unlike other devices that show you a button box at the bottom. But you can do these actions. However, what it doesn't integrate is a scanner or anything like that. So sometimes simple software can be too simple depending on what kind of user you are. But I don't like that this device doesn't integrate a scanner. In this case, even the ultra-wide camera allows you to use a high-resolution mode so you can capture these pictures, although it doesn't seem to have an exaggeratedly good sharpness. In fact, you don't see that much detail, it just looks like a stretched photograph, so it's not useful for real high-resolution photography. The main camera, in this high-resolution mode, doesn't seem to give us this desired sharpness either. You don't get as high a level of detail as we would have imagined with a real 50 megapixel camera. Obviously, you can apply some simple cropping without losing too much detail, but it doesn't look that spectacular. However, if you're not interested in taking high-resolution pictures, these cameras do just fine. For example, this is a motion scenario and you notice that the ultra-wide camera does a good job. The main camera also does a good job of freezing this kind of fast motion. And outdoors, the ultra-wide camera seems to underperform the main camera. Interestingly, despite having a high-resolution sensor, it looks like it's not really going to manage color well. And in this case, curiously, it was in the upper right corner that we noticed a little bit more distortion and chromatic aberration, but I say it's curious because in the left corner, you don't really get to appreciate it at this same level. So it's not a very advanced camera, but it can deliver. The main camera, of course, will have better quality in these outdoor scenarios. It captures colors well, although it's not completely free of chromatic aberration that can be generated in this case, as you realize, especially in the light and shadow division. So it's not a professional level camera, but it delivers for the vast majority of users. And supposedly this device gives us a telephoto camera setting of 50mm by applying a crop on the sensor, but the truth of the matter is that it's completely digital zoom, it doesn't maintain optical quality, and I think in this price range we could ask for a better quality zoom in this setting. In fact, let me show you the entire zoom range so you can see how it's really not a device that's going to stand out in that regard. Right now you're looking at a picture with 5x zoom and immediately you see a pretty plain quality that we usually find on much cheaper devices. The maximum zoom it allows is 10x, but that's definitely very low quality. The maximum it should allow would be 4x, so the zoom is definitely a weak point, although I am hopeful that Nodding will release an update to optimize this, as Nodding is known for sending good updates, but I can't say for sure. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera still manages to pick up a good amount of light, there's not as much noise, and it still retains a good level of detail. Apparently here it manages to take advantage of this high-resolution sensor by merging the pixels. Although of course the main camera is going to show us a much nicer color saturation and of course more level of detail, so the main camera performs quite well. In backlit scenes, again it stands out that the preview looks much more optimized than the vast majority of smartphones. You don't see the background completely burned out. Notice how even with the ultra-wide camera, we see a good balance of highlights and shadows after capturing this photograph. The main camera also has this same level of performance, balancing highlights and shadows well. And at night, where it's generally a more difficult environment, that's where you're going to notice most that the ultra-wide camera has a high-resolution sensor. In this case, I think it's the best ultra-wide camera in the range because you notice that it retains a very good level of detail, which even goes so far as to outperform much more expensive devices with its ultra-wide camera. It also exposes the more brightly lit areas very well. It is a photograph with a very well-controlled noise and maintains a good level of detail. Honestly, I think it's a very good picture. The main camera curiously has a little more noise present, as you'll notice in some areas, although it still exposes the brightest areas well. And it also maintains good detail, but at the cost of having a lot of noise. So I would hope that also through an update, they would improve the performance of this main camera, because I don't understand how the ultra-wide camera can give a result with a better controlled noise than the main camera when it is usually the other way around. And I also wanted to test these cameras in a much darker environment, and even the preview with the ultra-wide camera came to surprise me because it was quite a dark environment. And the result with the ultra-wide camera is good in terms of light, but it gets quite confused on the white balance, so in this case it exaggerated the warm tone that was there at the time. However, considering it is a very dark scene and the price of this device, I think it does a very good job. The main camera does an even more impressive job. Notes that it has much more accurate color management and holds detail well, and I insist that this was a very dark scene with indirect light very far away. For macro photography, the device does a very good job despite not integrating a dedicated camera for this purpose. Even if you apply zoom 2x, you might be able to get a picture with a bit more detail, but since it doesn't maintain optical quality, I can't say for sure. However, for macro photography, it still performs well. Panoramic photography will also be of good quality in this case if it has a good resolution, although it is not exaggeratedly high. But what I like is that it has a good dynamic range and good color saturation, so you can take advantage of it. It just doesn't allow you to use the ultra-wide camera with this panoramic mode. Finally, let's see how it fares with portrait photography, because it notes that in this case it does not get to have a level of detail as high as we would have liked. Although the edge detection, if done correctly, and is also able to detect objects to keep them in focus. In fact, it also allows us to take portrait photos with a perspective of 50mm, which is much more professional, but again the level of detail will be very low, so they are not very high quality portraits, but to share them on social networks I think it is more than enough. I also captured other portraits at night to more or less see how it behaves in these scenarios, and I think it's a very similar experience. The level of detail is not as high, but it does have good enough edge detection. What I would definitely like more would be for it to give us more detail in the 50mm mode to have even more spectacular photography, but I insist on my comment that for social networking it will suffice. For video recording, the good news is that you can record in 4K at 30 frames per second, not only with the main camera but also with the ultra-wide camera. In fact, you could also upload at 60 frames per second as long as you want to sacrifice resolution. But the good news is that the ultra-wide camera also supports recording at 60 frames per second. I think this is something we can highlight as a strong point because many competitors limit recording on the ultra-wide camera to only Full HD at 30 frames per second, but this one has good capabilities. Notice that while recording video, we are going to find these quick zoom shortcuts or also a slider that is activated by holding down on these indicators. If you want to slide directly, notice that they do not appear. You have to press and hold, and then it allows you to slide. That's something I personally didn't like very much. I would like a more streamlined experience. You can also pause and resume your recording as well as take pictures while recording, but note that it doesn't allow us to use the flash while recording or rotate to the front camera until we stop recording. Then we can use the glyph light to illuminate these videos or use the main flash. If the video recording is set to Full HD, note that the ultra-wide camera will also be available to make this change between the different cameras, so it seems that this will be the recommended configuration. It also has an HDR video recording mode that you could turn on in the additional settings. So the fact that this device allows us to record with the ultra-wide camera is very positive. However, as a disadvantage, it will not allow us to switch dynamically between the ultra-wide camera and the main camera, which limits you much more. The recording quality of this camera seems to me really very good, but it is a pity that it forces us to stop recording to be able to start from the main camera. Although curiously the color of the ultra-wide camera I liked more than the main camera, there is a small difference, although in both cases we see a color representation I think very close to reality and with a good quality. Indoors, note that the ultra-wide camera still does a good job of noise control and color saturation, so the truth is very good also in this kind of scenarios, something that is rare in the price range. Of course, the main camera is going to give us even more detail because it doesn't have to deal with as much noise and it maintains color saturation well in these scenarios with much lower lighting than outdoors. In backlit conditions, note that the ultra-wide camera manages to do a very good job for the price if you see slightly overexposed the background when it detects the face, but believe me, for the price it has, and with the ultra-wide camera, the result is good enough. With the main camera, the performance is very similar. It is not as spectacular as what we had seen in the picture, but I insist that for the price range, I think the result is positive. Generally, mid-range devices tend to overexpose much more light areas in exchange for illuminating the face, but not this one. However, at night, if you notice a bit more noise from the ultra-wide camera, but it still performs quite well compared to the ultra-wide camera of other manufacturers in this price range. In fact, believe me, there are other manufacturers that even in more expensive devices have a simpler ultra-wide camera. So even though there is noise present, it maintains good detail. What it fails to do is to expose well the most illuminated areas, but that is something much more complicated that we would only demand from premium devices. Although notice how the main camera manages to have a much greater light input, so at night there will be a more marked difference between one camera and the other, making it more advisable to record with the main camera. It maintains a good control of noise, while the saturation of colors just again is not able to balance well the brightest areas of the image. But that is something very complicated. Even in the darkest scenes it maintains good detail and good saturation. The stabilization with the ultra-wide camera seems very good to me. Notice that when walking it regulates these compensating movements very well, and even when running with good speed it still gives a good balance in all movements. And all this in 4K is spectacular. With the main camera also maintains a good digital stabilization. Just in this video you can see that the white balance is varying very drastically, but that's another matter. For now, with respect to stabilization, I think it does a very good job. In fact, it has a higher stabilization mode that when you activate it, the resolution will drop to Full HD only. And I think it won't be that necessary because with the ultra-wide camera, you have a much more spectacular result. So it was useless to me, but where it can be useful is if you want to record a scene with a little zoom. In this case, 2x's are available with this good stabilization mode and the result is very good. In fast motion scenes, you can go from 15x, which could be a little too fast for people movements, plus it has no stabilization, so it could be improved. Fortunately, it is in 4K, but it is much more focused on landscape scenes perhaps, where you can have the device static to have a better quality. And in this sense, it can go up to 960x, so yes, you could record very spectacular scenes in fast motion. On the other hand, with respect to slow motion, it can be in full HD at 120 frames per second. It doesn't give the option to go slower, even lowering the resolution or something similar, so it's a single slow motion setting. Notice that the focus handles it smooth. It doesn't have a very fast response, but it is an accurate response. But in this test again, we notice that the white balance could be altered very radically. Notice that when we have the close object, it's a warmer representation, and when we removed it, it was a cooler representation. So the white balance specifically, I don't like how it behaves, but all other things are fine. And lastly, I forgot to tell you about the zoom. I was already anticipating that you can't zoom in if you record with the ultra-wide camera, but recording with the main camera is going to allow you to get similar to the picture up to 10x. But the quality doesn't really look appealing. It seems to me that the maximum zoom it should allow would be 4x. So the zoom has really disappointed both in photography and video. The front camera is also going to offer us a very good quality in terms of resolution, stabilization, and color. The only detail and drawback I see is that it has a very close perspective, so you need to have your arm really stretched out if you want to come out well framed. And that really produces a bit of an uncomfortable feeling, but the stabilization is really very good. You even notice that in backlit scenarios it performs really very well. So it's a camera that I liked in pretty much every way. If it were wider and with autofocus, it would be perfect. Although indoors it suffers much more, note that even the movements look slightly slower because there is not so much light, but it controls noise well, maintains good color saturation, although I insist that it generates a vibration to maintain stabilization. Well, that could be uncomfortable at times when there is not so much light, and at night, although it maintains color saturation well, a little more noise starts to appear. However, if you are near a light source, the result can still be positive, but if you are in darker areas, there will be more noise, unlike in photography where it controlled it quite well. And in this case, it will offer a fast front-facing camera mode. By default, it records in full HD, but it can reach 4K, although the truth is simple. In addition, it does not offer us front slow motion or a dual recording mode or more advanced things. In the software, you already know that nothing bets on an idea very close to pure Android, but with an interesting aesthetic. You already noticed on the back cover how it is a brand that seeks to differentiate itself in aesthetics. And in software, it is also going to do it, but before showing you all the features it brings, I tell you that now comes with Nothing OS 2.6. However, the update to Nothing OS 3.0 is already on the way, which will have interesting changes, so let's wait. Surely when you receive it, we are going to have a renewed feeling, but for now, this version is based on Android 14. It has a 3-year policy of software updates with 4 years of security patches, which I think is fine. It's not going to be the most advanced thing in the price range, but I think it's enough to give it a good lifespan. Now join me in looking at the features it brings. For starters, note that in the launcher we will find a design close to pure Android, as I say, but with some special widgets. In fact, widgets are an essential part of the design of this operating system. Note that there are 29 widgets designed by Nothing. I think there are a few manufacturers that design so many widgets for their devices, but in this case they all have this dot design or with this special typography that Nothing uses in other sections. Then note that you can customize your home screen in a very good way by placing all these widgets. In this sense it can stand out because I insist that few brands give this variety of widgets to their users. Besides that, obviously there will be the widgets of all the other applications, but I love to see so much variety. In fact, note that on the lock screen you can also place some widgets, so we have very good tools there. You have some slots where you can place widgets and you can fill them completely or leave some empty spaces. You can also make the widgets small size or large size with different styles. So this widget section is the highlight of this device, probably at the operating system level. Another point will also be the glyph interface, which is definitely something differential. For starters, notice that it has a control with 3 brightness levels for all these backlights. In this case, note that it also allows us to synchronize the lights with different ringtones. And best of all is that these sounds are not only synchronized sound and lights, but also with the vibration engine that already anticipated you that is of good quality. Exactly the same will happen with notifications, where we will find different styles of notification in conjunction with vibration and synchronized with the different styles of lights that we have on the back. You could also completely disable these lights, which makes no sense because it is one of the main attractions of this cell phone, but if at some point you want to avoid distracting people with the light, you can turn it off perfectly. There is also another function called flip to glyph, which when activated will make if you have the device face down, it will enter a mode of complete silence, only alerting you through the lights but will not emit sound. It also includes another function of the glyph timer, so you can set a timer with a specific time. In this case, I will place only 30 seconds, and notice that immediately when you turn the device upside down, it will turn on one of its lights. And as I told you a moment ago, it has different light zones, so it can turn on only half of this light. Watch how little by little this light is going to go down until it reaches a very small illumination to tell you how your timer is running out of time. So it can also be an attractive visual tool when you like to use timers for different activities. In this case, it's about to run out and that's it, it's over. The funny thing is that this glyph timer is available within the settings of these lights, but if you go straight to the clock app and set a timer, notice that it doesn't actually go in sync with the glyph lights, so this should improve. There is also a composer where you can design your own sounds in conjunction with the glyph lights, but this is an app that you download from the Google Play Store. So if you want something very specific with the lights, you can achieve it through this composer. There is also a volume indicator that simply what it will do is help you also see a reference of the volume level, even if you don't want to see the screen. And there is another very interesting point that could also take advantage of that LED strip, which is the glyph progress. In this case, developers of different applications should take advantage of the API provided by Nothing to implement it in their applications. And currently there are few applications that take advantage of it. So, for example, you could set it up with Uber so that this same strip of LEDs can signal to you how the car is approaching to pick you up. So it could also be something quite curious, but I insist that few applications can currently take advantage of it. Also, through these lights, you will be able to synchronize your music so that it can light up in conjunction with any sound that is emitted by the speaker. So in this case, it is compatible with any music application. Finally, you can also set a schedule while you go to sleep so that these lights are not interrupting or disturbing your sleep. At the customization level, note that the manufacturer offers you to select the color palette in a very easy way. It can extract them from your wallpaper, or you can select them directly from a default palette. Something interesting is that it also allows you to select different icon packs. Remember that by default, Nothing will try to give a uniform aesthetic. However, there are some icons that are not supported and might cause a blotchy view on the main screen. So it's entirely up to you what level of customization you want to achieve. But it even allows you to download icon packs from Play Store to apply them directly here to your screen. So, without the need to install an additional launcher, you have this level of customization. Also note that in wallpapers we are going to find something interesting, as it allows you to create wallpapers directly. Just select some categories. Here you can go changing the style, for example, and also the type of photo you want to generate. Then through artificial intelligence, it will generate a wallpaper that will be unique to you. This is something very good if you like unique designs. And ready? With that you can apply them. And in case you choose one of your photos, note that there are also some effects that you can apply. For example, your wallpaper can look just like your lock screen background. But you can also say that you want a blur effect for your home screen or a behind glass like effect for the lock screen. So you can have these creative styles and see how together it's going to have a pretty interesting look. In fact, when you unlock, watch this animation that it does to pull out the main colors and create this new wallpaper. So it's interesting customization. Notice that if you plug in a wireless headset from this brand or CMF, it will appear directly in your quick settings panel so you can give it a look at the battery status. And experimentally also, if you connect Apple AirPods to it, they might appear here. Something quite curious because they usually don't have such advanced interaction with Android, but Nothing has managed it. The one-handed use mode I personally don't like. It will only move towards the bottom and in the middle the things that are on the topmost part. But it will be difficult to access, for example in this case the camera button, which I personally have a hard time reaching with one hand. So it's practically impossible to reach that section. It also includes some basic gestures that we can find in many other devices, such as sliding 3 fingers to take a screenshot. although it comes turned off by default. And we could also take specific screenshots by holding 3 fingers on the screen and then swiping to the specific area we want to capture. And notice that if you make these screenshots, a button with an eye appears in this part that will send this screenshot to ChatGPT to request something based on that screenshot. For example, write a comment to reply to that post. And notice that in this case, it's going to analyze the content of the post, and here it suggests a comment for me to post. In the same way, I could send you a screenshot of an email for you to compose a reply or something similar. So it could be useful as a quick shortcut. Also in screenshots, we will find the option to capture more content than the screen can traditionally display, although it has a certain limit. Notice that in this case, in the list of recent apps, we could also open a split screen mode to have 2 apps running at the same time. If you exit these apps, notice that they will remain linked in the recent apps list. And we could also open some of these apps in a pop-up window view. Only in this case, the pop-up window is not so useful because anyway, all the elements that are in the back lose focus, so they are slightly blurred. So, you cannot interact at the same time between 2 applications with this floating window mode. So, it's a bit useless from my point of view. And in artificial intelligence functions, I was already pointing out that it has a wallpaper generator, but we are also going to find this one, which is a news generator. It is quite curious because all you have to do is choose a news category and it will automatically generate a 1-minute summary. So when you tap on this icon, it will immediately start giving you the news. Although in this case, it is still an experimental function. It reads the news in English and therefore it loses a little more sense or appeal, but the idea is interesting. For the security experience, we will find a fingerprint reader inside the screen that works quite well. In this case, I have no complaints. It supports up to 5 registrations and doesn't have any customization options or anything like that. But the response is actually good. It also has facial recognition, but it's 2-dimensional, so we won't pay much attention to it. And it has Google Extended Unlock, so you don't need to have to constantly be unlocking your cell phone with your passcode or fingerprint or anything like that, but it stays unlocked in secure environments. And note that you can also autofill some forms with Google Autofill, but it doesn't verify by fingerprint before filling. Although in Google settings, you can indeed enable verification before filling. So even in some security aspects, it is a Google-dependent device. For example, it doesn't have a native secure folder but relies on the Google Files or Google Photos secure folder. But remember that the Google Files secure folder does not support the fingerprint reader, so there are reduced options. Fortunately, in the app settings, we will find a section to clone apps and have 2 accounts of the same app on this cell phone. We can also select which applications we want to be blocked for access. And in order to log in, you must first authorize it with your fingerprint. This is something relevant because Android Pure did not have that option, so it is added by nothing. But it still lacks many other options that we could find in other devices. The battery has a capacity of 5000 mAh. This is an average capacity and in fact the duration is also average. It reached 4.5 hours in my close-up drain test, performing very well. So it seems that it does make good use of this battery, it has a good consumption, but here what I did notice is that it doesn't reduce the power consumption of the apps that are running in the background, it keeps them at the highest priority level. So in my background draining test, it even had less battery life, something very strange because usually in my background test they usually go up in battery time. So yes, I'm going to highly recommend that you keep the apps that are running in the background closed if you're not using them because otherwise they're going to be draining your battery significantly. So if you want good battery life, keep open only what you are using. Then also note that it has a traditional power saving mode that even activates dark mode, but it doesn't really have an emergency mode like super power saving or anything like that. So in emergencies, you won't have many alternatives. Regarding the charger, we will find the biggest complaint because it is not included in the box, so you must necessarily buy it from their store. And in this case, it supports 50 watts charging. Fortunately, it seems that it is compatible with power delivery. At least I charged it with a 65-watt power delivery charger, and with that charger it got up to 40% in only 15 minutes of charging. So I think it does have this support for fast charging. In 30 minutes it got up to 75%, so I think you'd get a lot of the power back and you can go the whole day. And the full charge finished in 53 minutes. Really, the charging power is very good, but it is unfortunate that the charger is not included in the box. In this case, we will not find wireless charging, but fortunately, it does bring good options to take care of the battery, such as smart charging, which will learn your routine to charge slowly if you leave it charging all night. Or we will also find the custom charging lock, which can be at 70, 80, or 90%, useful if you want to leave the charger plugged in at all times. For connectivity, we will find good support for Wi-Fi networks 6 and 5G. In that aspect, it complies with good download speeds. However, at the software level, it doesn't include a section to configure which apps will be able to access the internet with your mobile data and which apps will only be able to do so over Wi-Fi, which would give you more control. That is not available. One important absence to consider is that it doesn't support eSIM. So if you travel a lot, it's going to be a bit more inconvenient to have to be acquiring physical SIM cards. It also integrates support for Bluetooth 5.3 and NFC. It does not have FM radio. And in this case, it integrates a simple screen projection. Fortunately, it is not only compatible with Chromecast. Although for some strange reason in this case it seems to be failing projection. I guess with some update they should fix it. Although you should know that it can't project your screen via cable, what it can do, both wired and wireless, is activate Android Auto on your vehicle's screen. Fortunately, it does integrate accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor, and orientation sensor. Also gyroscope, light sensor, and a fully physical proximity sensor that won't give you any trouble. In the ecosystem, this is still a very Google-dependent brand. That is, it does not have self-developed technologies to interact in an advanced way between different types of devices. So while we are going to find some accessories under the CMF brand which are compatible and integrate nicely, for example in the notifications panel and these things, there's not really that advanced interaction. It has headphones, it has watch, but for example the headphones will use Google Fast Pair technology to link easily, so they rely on Google in that aspect, also in cloud storage and also in controlling home devices, also to send and receive files with other devices. So if it wasn't for Google, this brand would have a lot more complications. Let's test how is the performance of this device by opening several applications, and while I tell you its specifications. It integrates the MediaTek Dimensity 7350 Pro processor. A processor that honestly we have not seen integrated in many other devices, so we do not have such a clear reference of it. But accompanied by 12 GB of RAM, it should run pretty smooth considering that the operating system is very light and does not add so many options. In fact, by default, it comes with another 2 GB of virtual RAM, but allows you to extend it up to an additional 8 GB. It took 4.6 seconds on average. Truth be told, it's disappointing the performance it gave us in terms of application opening speed. Let's hope that once the application is open, it goes much smoother because it really has been quite disappointing so far. Notice that navigating between these already opened apps, it doesn't seem to present any problems or any lag, but it's definitely not giving us the performance we were expecting in terms of speed. Fortunately, it seems that now that they are open, there won't be any issues. With so much RAM, you shouldn't have any problems, but note that when you go back to this application, if you notice a little bit of slowness or clumsiness when you're moving around, note it looks like overall it's not going to be a device that's going to stand out for a lot of power. It seems that this processor has not been the best that MediaTek has released, or it also seems that nothing has not managed to optimize the resources of this device very well, because with so much RAM it should not be so slow when we return to some of these applications. Fortunately, we have not seen reboots, but definitely that the experience has not delighted us. Remember that it has 256 GB of storage, but the truth is that they have a bit slower read speed than we would have liked. It looks like it won't be very advanced storage, and I'm guessing the write speed will be even slower. So possibly also this storage will cause slow performance when you are downloading stuff or exporting some video or something similar. But let's do the specific test, because for now the speed of the storage is really letting me down. So, as usual, we have a project with a total duration of 1 minute using clips recorded with this device. On this occasion, they're clips in 4K for the price range, and we're going to put them to export to see roughly how long it takes. And it took 57 seconds. Again, I'm being disappointed. Nothing seems to have missed the mark with the hardware chosen for the performance of this device. This device has the game mode, and note that here you can manage the list of games where additional tools will appear. Here you can enable or disable this sidebar and also select how you want the notifications to appear. If you want them to be completely disabled, to be displayed in traditional format or in a condensed format so that they don't get in the way. Also note that it allows you to avoid unwanted touches on the edges, and finally it will help you avoid disconnections on the network when you receive a call. So it has good enough tools, but not the most advanced at the moment. You could also select that nobody interrupts you while you are playing, except for the people you have configured in the Do Not Disturb mode. And note that in this case, this little sidebar will appear where you can enable or disable the maximum performance mode. Obviously, for our tests, we kept it at this setting. You could also block calls or configure their behavior as well as notifications. You can also block automatic brightness and finally make screen recordings. So we have simple tools compared to what we find on some other manufacturers. In Call of Duty, by default, it gives us the high graphic quality at a high frame rate, but we can also go up to a very high graphic quality, and if we select the ultra rate, the graphic quality goes down to the lowest level. So here you have to make a decision what you want to give preference to. Note that having the very high graphic quality and a very high frame rate per second, we will have several effects available, so the processor compatibility in this sense looks positive. First, we played giving priority to the graphic quality, and in this case I think we did quite well. Let's say it had perfect stability, which surprises me because you saw that in previous tests this device had a pretty poor performance, but it seems that in games it doesn't do so bad. Also, the temperature was well controlled, and you're definitely going to have a good gaming experience with this device even while recording the screen. We then prioritized the refresh rate, and note that it did hit 90 frames per second, again with very good stability. So I think it's interesting to see that this device is one of the few in this price range that does hit 90 frames per second. So if you like to play this content, I think it will give you a good experience, even though in the apps we saw that it was behaving a little bit poorly. In the Legends game, we changed the automatic setting to a medium setting at 60 frames per second. And in this case, by a bug, we kept the screen recording even while we were monitoring the frames per second. And considering that it was recording and monitoring, it's remarkable that it maintained good stability. Practically 60 frames per second on average, with good stability and a very good temperature control, just reaching 36.3 degrees Celsius. Really, in games, it has surprised me for the better. I had a low expectation after seeing the lousy performance it had in applications, but it surprised me. In SpongeBob SquarePants, by default, it has the resolution and average quality at 30 frames per second. What we did was we went up to 60 frames per second, and again with this graphics setting it maintains good performance. It had very few low peaks, but they're not even that low, just 52 frames per second. So even though it doesn't maintain an exaggeratedly stable frames per second experience, the fact that it doesn't get that low, it still feels very smooth. Again, we saw excellent temperature control. I think that's something that can stand out very much in favor of this device because the feel is very good in games. Finally, in Henshin Impact, by default, it defaults to low quality. To test, we went up to medium quality at 60 frames per second. And the visual effects, we dropped them down to the medium level to see how it did with this test. And in this case, it didn't do as well as the other games, but it's obviously the most complicated game. Plus, it was raining at this time. It might have affected it a little bit. It wasn't a complete disaster, but you do get to notice the low peaks a lot more. But again, what stands out to me is that the temperature was really low at 40.2 degrees Celsius. So it's a game that does get to behave well on this device if you set the graphics quality to a not very high level. But overall, in gaming, I did like it. In conclusion, I think it is a very attractive device for those looking for a very different design than usual. Fulfilling with good screen, good sound, cameras that I think are within acceptable in many of its parameters, with some little things to improve. The battery also goes well. Consider that you have to buy the charger separately because that could bother you a lot, but fortunately it does support power delivery chargers. The performance was what left me a little strange feeling because in applications and video editing was very bad, but in games it was very good. Hopefully with some update they can get to correct these problems because I'm sure they could do it. For now we have reached the end of this video. If you liked it, you know you can tell us about it and we'll see you next time.